Have you ever had that feeling of uncertainty, where something was happening and you really weren't sure what it was, and you didn't know how to fix it? It was like that the first time I went to the doctor. I was scared. I was so afraid of what he was going to say and the uncertainty of it all, and there were questions racing around in my mind about what was going to happen next, and as he was examining me, my heart was pounding in anticipation. Would he really know what was wrong? Could he help me? What would I do if the diagnosis was bad? What would I do if the diagnosis was good? Where was I going to be in 10 years, 15, 20 years, if my condition worsened? I had some sort of unknown problem, something wrong with my blood, and there were several consequences if the doctor couldn't repair the damage. The first was my health. If there was no fix, I would continue to go downhill and maybe even lose my life. And that's a pretty frightening thought, a disease taking away my life and my physical health. But what scared me even more than that was the isolation and the emotional torment I might experience. In my culture, there are laws that are carried out, these things that are called Levitical laws. They were put in place long ago by our God. They were set up for the safety and well-being of our people. We used to be nomadic, traveling in huge camps along the desert, and no disease was supposed to spread, and our people were supposed to remain pure, set apart from other regions. So, if a man had a spot or a blemish that looked suspicious, he would go see a priest. The priest, like doctors, would identify the spot, and if it was dangerous, that person was declared unclean by the priest and would have to leave the camp. They were considered contagious until it cleared up. Nobody was to touch them, nobody was to interact with them, lest the disease spread to the other person, and there was an epidemic. Now, when a woman was on her period, and she bled, it was the same way. This Levitical law explained that she was to remain alone. Anything that she touched or sat on was considered unclean because of the bleeding. Anyone who touched her was also unclean and had to go through a washing ritual, and the woman was unclean even for a week after her period finished. Now, I knew that if my bleeding didn't stop, I would live a very lonely life. If this doctor couldn't fix it, then every day, for the rest of my life, I would be an unclean human being. I'd be no different than the one with a contagious skin disease or the woman on her period. People would avoid me and they would consider me filthy, some out of fear and some out of spite and some out of ignorance. But I knew that they would all treat me the same, and I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I couldn't go to the synagogue to hear the teaching. I couldn't go to the center of the town to talk with any other women. I couldn't even go to the marketplace by myself to get food because I would contaminate things, and that thought alone tore at my heart. As the doctors finished, I looked into his eyes, and I saw that familiar expression on his face, and well, I already knew what he was going to say. Sorry, I just can't help you. Or in other words, you had better go see the priest. Can't help me? You can't do anything? You can't give me some sort of medicine. You can't stitch something together. You can't put a Band-Aid on top of it to stop whatever is happening inside of me? And he shook his head and he sent me away. But maybe I could get a second opinion. And I did. This doctor suggested a remedy, but he told me it didn't come cheap, and I was willing to pay whatever it took. So I asked him how much, and I paid him the sum, and that so-called medicine didn't do a thing. Another doctor suggested a procedure, but his fee was even more expensive than the last. Still, I was hopeful, so I paid him, and it did stop the bleeding for a little while, but in the long run, I remained sick. So I went to a third, and a fourth, and a fifth doctor, and each time paying more money, and more money, and more money, and each time coming back with the same disappointing result. I'm sorry, I just can't help you. But maybe if you bought this type of medicine, maybe if we tried this, maybe if we do that, maybe if you traveled to this land and went through this medical procedure, it might work this time. But there was always a question mark. For 12 years, 12 long years, this was my life. Every year that passed, for 12 years, 12 long years, this was my life. Every year that passed, I became sicker. I became weaker. I became poorer. I became angrier, lonelier, and I became more hopeless until I was a shriveled up, empty human being. It was a mere shadow of what I was before my illness. I remember laying in my bed, far too weak to sit up, with tears in my eyes. I remember laying in my bed, far too weak to sit up, with tears in my eyes, crying, why do I have to go through this, God? Isn't there anything that you can do? Don't you see where I am? Don't you see my suffering? Don't you see my pain? What hope is there? The little consolation that I had in this state was being able to hear what was happening outside in the streets and imagining that I was there, and it was the only thing that I had. Though my health was failing, my ears were not, and my attention was grabbed by any news in the town. Did you hear? Mrs. Stevenson down the road just gave birth. They're twins. There are not going to be any quiet moments in that house, and I would picture those baby twins causing a ruckus in the house, and I would smile. Listen up. There was a fight in the center of town, and now 2 men are going to discuss it before the judge. And I would close my eyes, and I would picture a judge and the 2 men discussing their affairs. And no 2 stories were the same usually. But near the end of that 12th year, there was a recurring theme in the street talk. Did you hear? This teacher named Jesus, he encountered a lame man, and he told the lame man to get up and walk, and the man was able to get up and walk even after he had been at that gate for years. Did you hear about Jesus? Remember that blind man who was blind since birth? Well, he hadn't seen a day in his life, but then Jesus put mud in his eyes and told him to wash it off, and when he washed away the mud, the man was able to see. Did you hear? Did you hear there was this centurion man who sent a messenger to request that Jesus heal his beloved servant, and Jesus didn't even have to go touch the man, and Jesus said he would be healed, and in that very instant, that man was healed. I heard about this Jesus while on my bed, healing deaf, mute, blind, casting out demons, out teaching the Pharisees, and even raising dead back to life. And I visualized it all through the stories. But one story stood out the most. Did you hear? This leper came into town and he cried out to Jesus saying, if Jesus was willing, he could be healed. And Jesus knelt beside this leper and he touched him. Jesus touched an unclean man. A man isolated, a man avoided, a man like me. And his touch healed that man. What if his touch could heal me too? What if he wouldn't be afraid of me? What if I could be more than just an unclean person to him? He wouldn't shrink back, not if the stories were true. He could heal me. And he would. I knew he would. But when would that opportunity ever come my way? Then one day it finally did. It sounded like a large crowd had gathered. Voices were bustling in the streets, and the sounds and the shouts and the shuffles and the excitement hung in the air. And I shouted out the door, "What's going on?" And someone shouted back, "Jesus is here. Jairus is taking him to his home. He's going to help his sick little girl." And I shouted, "Can Jesus come in here a moment?" To which there was a laughing response, "No, the child is so sick, we have to go as fast as possible." I listened as the crowd got louder and louder, and my determination got stronger than it had ever been before. I knew for sure this man could heal me. I knew I had to see him, and this might be my only chance, so I agonizingly pulled myself out of bed and step by painful step made my way out the door. And I was weary by the time I got there, but I called out, "Jesus, please help me!" The voices of the crowd overpowered my own voice, so I painfully moved in where the crowd was, and I called again, "Jesus, please, please help me!" As I did, I saw a brief glimpse of this man, this teacher whom so many had talked about, and I knew he wasn't going to be able to hear me. So many were pushing and shoving, trying to touch him. When I tried to force my way through, my body was so weak and torn and weary that I could not even begin to press into the crowd. I expressed desperately, "Excuse me, let me through. I need to see Jesus. I need him to touch me." "You and everyone else," someone said back. And finally, my physical weakness got the best of me, and I collapsed to the floor. Oh, how I longed to talk to him and to experience this healing touch I had heard so much about. But Jesus was so far off. He couldn't hear me, and he couldn't see me, and no one was going to give me, a diseased and unclean woman, the chance to be near. So I knelt on the ground, waiting for the crowd to pass, so that I could crawl my way back to my home, and I could just see his feet and the hem of his garment peeking through the shuffles of the sandals and cloth. And I thought, wow, he really isn't that far off. I'm just too tired to get in past the bodies. An idea came to mind. I remembered that centurion and how Jesus healed his servant, even though he wasn't next to him. If Jesus had the power to do that, surely he had power enough for me. And maybe, just maybe, if I could reach the hem of his garment and touch it, it would be enough to heal me. So with every last bit of strength, I reached and I pushed and I stretched until I felt it, the garment of the teacher, and I grabbed onto it with everything that I could. And there are some moments that you never ever forget, and this was one of them. Quicker than I could blink, my entire body was completely transformed. I was energized and invigorated, and I felt the blood stop flowing after 12 long and miserable years. I pulled my hand away. The crowd kept moving, and I looked at myself in some water on the ground, and I looked healthy. My hollow, pale cheeks were filled out, and they were rosy colored. And my hands that had looked like skeletons were normal. And my thin and my frail frame was now strong. And I stayed there looking at that reflection, and I praised him. It was a miracle. The stories were true. I had been fully healed. And it wasn't over, because the crowd stopped and became silent, and Jesus asked a question that sent a jolt through me. Who touched me? Oh no, was Jesus like the doctors? Was he expecting a payment of some sort? Maybe he wasn't even talking about me, because there were a lot of other people touching him. His disciples even pointed that out to him, but when he said he felt power leave him, I knew who he was talking about, and I knew that I couldn't hide. Trembling in fear, I stood up and I said, "Jesus, I touched you." The crowd turned around, and I felt eyes piercing me. I can only imagine what was going through their minds, for they knew how sick I had been. "Jesus, I touched you," I said. But it wasn't because I was being disrespectful or disruptive. I've had an illness for 12 years, and I heard about your miracles, and I couldn't get through to see you or ask for help, so I reached for your garment because I thought maybe if I touch you, I could be healed, and I was healed. But I don't have any money, Jesus. I can't pay for this, nor do I have any resources to give you in return, but I was desperate. Murmurs of disapproval and disbelief from the crowd. But he had a warm smile on his face. "Daughter, it's okay. Don't be afraid. Your faith is payment enough. Your faith is what has healed you. Go in peace." Just like that. I had been set free. Free from a disease that had ripped my life apart. Free from the isolation it had caused. Free from the emotional pain at no cost. Christ's healing touch was faith-centered. Jesus did that for me. And he can do that for you too. I don't know what sort of pains you have, or what sort of things have broken you down. Maybe you have a disease. Maybe you struggle with something. Maybe emotional turmoil. But whatever it is, Jesus says the same to you. Daughter, son, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. You're set free.
Has your life been a mess? And are you wondering how it came to this? And where can you turn when it seems all your bridges have now been burned? Where do you go from here? Come unto me, all who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Salvation's a gift, you don't have to earn it. Lay your burdens down, I'll take and turn your life around. Come unto me. But looking back on things you've done, you fear you've gone too far for His forgiveness or His love. But do not fear, only believe. He said, I'll never all who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Salvation's a gift, you don't have to earn it. Lay your burdens down. I'll take and turn your life around. It's not about what you deserve. It's not about what you have earned. It's not about being good enough. What it's about is a God of love, who says, "Come unto me, all who are burdened, and I will give you rest." Salvation's a gift, you don't have to earn it. Lay your burdens down. I'll take and turn your life around. In spite of all that you have done, just come unto me. Come unto me, yeah.